Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. I'm Anne-Marie Green.
And I'm Vladimir Dutse. Thanks for joining us. President Trump's communications with a foreign leader were concerning enough to prompt a whistleblower complaint. That's according to the Washington Post, which reports an official in the U.S. intelligence community was so alarmed by a promise the president made to a foreign leader, he felt the need to alert investigators.
We don't have details on which foreign leader the president was speaking to or what promise he made. But now Congress is investigating, and one of the country's top intelligence chiefs is expected to testify today. Weijia Jiang is following the story from the White House and joins us now. What more can you tell us about this formal complaint?
You know, this is really highly sensitive information, and right now Congress, the House Judiciary Committee, Intelligence Committee, is trying to get their hands on this report so we all have more understanding about why the Inspector General for the intelligence community said that it was so credible that, as you mentioned, it was considered an urgent concern. And so we are still working our sources to try to understand what was so concerning. But the Washington Post is reporting that at the center of all of this is an interaction that President Trump had with a foreign leader and some sort of promise that was made that was deeply concerning. And so, again, here's the president at the center of this. We know that he has a irregular way of dealing with matters of intelligence, with foreign leaders, especially adversaries, but we cannot speculate about what this conversation was and what may or may not have been promised because we simply do not know. However, that Inspector General is going to be testifying in a closed-door hearing today on Capitol Hill, and so perhaps we'll get some more answers by the end of the day.
Weijia, the complaint, according to the Washington Post, was filed on August 12th. I wonder if it's possible to sort of glean some kind of information based on which foreign leaders the president was meeting with or speaking to at around that time.
Yeah, so based on our notes, all we can piece together is who we know that the president spoke with around this time, and that includes that includes Russia's President Vladimir Putin and the dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. Now, on August the 9th, we know that President Trump told us that he had just received another beautiful letter from Kim, but he did not reveal the content of that letter. We also know he met with a couple other leaders, including the prime ministers of Pakistan and the Netherlands, as well as the Emir of Qatar. Again, that's all we can say for sure, based on records, based on notes that we have, is who he spoke with. What he said, especially behind the scenes, we cannot even guess. Because this is such a bold accusation here that the president may have given one of these leaders a promise that was deeply concerning.
Now, pretty much everything the president does is supposed to be part of a presidential record, right? When he has conversations with world leaders, there's supposed to be other people listening in on the phone and keeping track of this. Shouldn't there be a record of this conversation somewhere, Weijia?
There should be, and we know that, someone heard something, right? Because this whistleblower had the goods to file a formal complaint that then was investigated and led to this conclusion by the Inspector General. But that doesn't mean it's public record, right? And so we don't have transcripts of every single conversation. In fact, more and more, we're getting less information from the White House. We used to get formal readouts all the time, every time the president had a conversation with a formal leader. And under Sarah Huckabee Sanders, that changed, and it was sort of left up to the White House to share what they wanted. And so other times we have to ask for, and sometimes do not get the answer to what was discussed during those conversations. And so it's totally up to the president and the White House what they want to reveal about those conversations.
Is it possible, Weijia, that in the next couple of days, because it is, and I know that we use the word unprecedented a lot when covering this administration and this president, I think we're going to have to come up with a new word because it's become
get the thesaurus out.
Yeah, commonplace to use that word unprecedented. But the fact that somebody in that administration thought whatever he or she heard was so troubling that they had to file this whistleblower complaint. The question, I guess, is will the American people ever learn in the next couple of days or weeks who the president was speaking to and what was said, or are we sort of going to be left without this information, this vital piece of information that the American people probably deserve to know?
Well, so the other piece of this is why this complaint is being withheld. And that's really what the Democratic chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, wants to get to the heart at, because he has issued a subpoena for the acting director of national intelligence, Joseph McGuire, to hand over this report so that his committee can pore over it and draw conclusions themselves. And so far, McGuire has refused to do that. He's also not testified. He was supposed to do that today, but we understand that he said he could not today and perhaps rescheduled. So really, Schiff is saying this smells like a cover-up. And he is concerned that the White House, the Department of Justice, that McGuire, and other members of the executive branch are trying to hide this report to protect President Trump. And that's what he has claimed in this letter that he delivered to McGuire. He said, the committee can only conclude based on this remarkable confluence of factors that the serious misconduct at issue involves the President of the United States and or people who are around him. And so, Schiff is really concerned here that the reason McGuire is refusing to hand over the information is because it directly has to do with President Trump and potential misconduct.
That just to put a fine point on that, Weijia, I mean, the president already has a shaky relationship with the intelligence community. Going back to those early days of his presidency when he delivered a political speech standing in front of that wall of stars at the CIA headquarters. The idea that the intelligence community, given all the work that they do, the very sensitive work that they do, where their lives are at risk, could somehow feel as if the relationship that they have with the commander-in-chief is not a solid one, that the jobs that they're doing and the things that the president says to other world leaders could put their lives at risk is fairly astounding.
Yeah, it is.
Well, that's because, this friction, you're right, has always existed. And it's because the president sometimes suggests that these intelligence agencies are supposed to be working for him. And so it almost feels like if any investigation could shade him negatively or any of his beliefs negatively, that they're wrong. And so he has many times in the past discredited different agencies and individuals who are leaders in those agencies because he feels slighted personally. I mean, we've reported at length, of course, about the Russia investigation, which is out of his own Department of Justice. And to him, it's all about his involvement, his potential collusion, his obstruction of justice. But he struggles to acknowledge, what's at the core of that investigation, which is Russian meddling in our election system. And so that's just, I think the biggest example, obviously, but certainly he has blatantly taken the sides of foreign adversaries instead of his own intelligence community. In fact, he did this when he was standing next to Vladimir Putin, and he discredited, the investigations, the intelligence that the Kremlin had, in fact, meddled. In other instances, his former Director of National Intelligence testified before a Senate committee basically discrediting what the president firmly believes about North Korea, about Iran, about ISIS in Syria. And the president tweeted, perhaps intelligence should go back to school. And so there are many, many examples where President Trump has very boldly, said things against his intelligence community, which is why this is just another chapter that illustrates the ongoing tension between him and people who are working to protect the U.S.
So So, Weijia, before we let you go, I want to ask you about the Trump administration's plans to roll back restrictions on car emissions. We've been covering this in California, and if you do it in California, it's such a large state, you can really have an influence on what happens in the rest of the country. So, what can you tell us about this?
Well, sure, especially when I'm sure you guys have been to California, and driving is just part of the lifestyle there. And so, since 1970, California has been able to control its own emissions standards when it comes to how much cars can pollute the air. And their standards are a lot tougher than the federal ones. And so the president is saying, wait a minute, it should be only federal regulators that set this. And he wants one nationwide standard that would be weaker than what California has right now. And his argument is that, that would lead to the production of more new cars. And new cars are cleaner and they're cheaper. Of course, he's assuming that people would be buying those fuel-efficient cars. He's also making the case that because we would have all these new vehicles, it would create more jobs. But the fact is that the transportation sector, creates the most emissions of any other sector here. And, there's also an issue about the cost to consumers. Consumer Reports finds that, if these weaker standards are in place, that it would cost the driver an average of $3,300 more over the lifetime of a car for fuel. And so there's a lot of concerns that this will actually be more expensive, and of course expensive to our public health whenever these emissions are flowing in a way that's less regulated. But the president, this is not the first time he has made decisions that fly in the face of science. And so this is just the latest of what environmentalists are concerned about that his administration is doing.
Yeah, and I don't even know if some of the major car companies are actually not interested in changing. They're fine the way the cars are being made.
Yeah, they're happy.
Exactly. And it's not just California. There are other states, 12 other states, in fact, that follow California's guidelines because they believe that overall, this is the most beneficial to the public.
Yeah. All right, Weijia, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.